Hello and welcome to this week's live Iran War Q&A with Michael Clarke and with me, Mark Austin. And in the past hour, Iran's state television has published what they say are details of a draft US deal, the terms of which, it says, includes the US military withdrawing from the region entirely, an end to the US naval blockade, possible, and Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, the US will be insisting on. This all comes as Donald Trump said a peace agreement with Iran had been largely negotiated over the weekend. Before that the US military launched what it called those defensive strikes in southern Iran on the Monday, with targets including missile launch sites and boats placing mines. Iran then responded by saying that was a clear violation of the ceasefire and vowed to leave no act of aggression unanswered. So where does this all leave us? We've got your questions here. Just first of all, though, Michael, this draft deal from Iranian state TV, I mean, how much weight should we give to that?
Well, it's an interesting statement. It might indicate that they're trying to jump the gun on something that was going to be announced by the Americans and that they want to go first. That's possible. But obviously, we want to hear what the White House may have to say. And I particularly would want to hear what CENTCOM says, Central Command. They're in charge of what's going on in the area. And they're a serious organization. I mean, the White House, we know, is volatile in terms of the way Trump reacts to things on a day-to-day basis. But CENTCOM is authoritative, and they don't say anything that they don't believe to be true. So I'll wait to hear what they say. The idea that, as you indicated, the Americans withdraw from the region, that's never going to happen. That they pull off the blockade is plausible, entirely plausible. They say that they've turned back over 100 ships that have tried to get through, and they've said, no, you can't come through. But remember also, this American blockade is actually about 400 or 500 miles away from the straits themselves. I mean, it's a big area in which 30-odd ships, 30-odd major American warships are moving around, hundreds of miles away from the coast in order to stay out of range. So they're at a safe distance. And in that sense, it's not as if they're all going to turn around and leave the Strait of Hormuz because they're not there anyway. So there's lots of flexibility in this. But we'll wait to hear from the American side what their interpretation is of this. But it's not nothing. If the Iranians have, from their bellicose rhetoric yesterday, saying that the Americans had committed a blatant, flagrant breach of the ceasefire, to saying today there's a deal ongoing, that's a big turnaround if any of it turns out to be true.
Yeah, I mean, it's more the fact that they're saying this is the outline of a deal rather than what the details may be. Katie asked the question, based on what we know about this reported deal, has one side won or lost? Well, there'll be different interpretations of that when it eventually happens.
I think so. I mean, most of the analysts now, they're writing in the newspapers, take the same view that I do, is that Trump and the Americans in the White House certainly are trying to make good a losing hand. I mean, they're in a losing position here. Politically, they're losing. And, there's the great Sun Tzu, the great Chinese strategy. Sun Tzu probably didn't exist, not as a single person anyway. But we're talking about, over a century before Thucydides and the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. Well, the great Sun Tzu said, or somebody said on his behalf, that strategy without tactics is just a daydream. But tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. That's it. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And I think, personally, that what we're getting from the White House and what we've had now for the last month from the White House is the noise before defeat, because it's been all tactics, all military activity, but no strategy, without any clear sense of how this military activity connects to what they're trying to achieve. And now that they're facing a losing situation, President Trump is trying now to define some sort of victory in this. And I don't think he's going to get much. He'll get something, but he'll have to convince America and the rest of the world it'll be plus or minus the 2015 deal that he reneged on. The Obama deal, the JCPOA as it was called of 2015, was not a bad deal at all at the time. And if we were only back in that position, we'd all feel we're in a better position than we are now. So it'll be plus or minus the 2015 deal, and he will have to try to make it look like a victory, which in reality, I don't think it will be.
But that is some way down the road, the nuclear side of this deal. I mean,
60 days away at least.
At least. So you're talking at the moment about a victory maybe being the Strait of Hormuz opening again, but the Strait of Hormuz was opened
exactly
back in February. I mean, we're laughing about it, but I mean, that is the basic point. If he tries to claim a victory on the Strait of Hormuz, that won't wash.
Yeah, we all want the straits to reopen because that's what's hurting the world economy, and we'd all take a sigh, we'd all breathe a sigh of relief if the straits were to open. Having said that, I don't think there's much chance that we'll go back to a situation on the Straits that was as good as it was before the end of February. I don't think we'll ever go back now to a completely open waterway, which the Iranians did not interfere with, because they now know how easy it is to close the Straits. They don't have to mine them to close them, even though they have mined them, but they only have to make it dangerous to pass. And they now know that with modern technology, with drones, with robotic ships, with the small mini submarines, which they've got, with modern technologies, which don't cost very much, they can make it very dangerous for these, 250, 300,000 ton tankers, these VLCCs, the very large crude containers, crude carriers, and the ULCCs, ultra large crude carriers, they which cost about 100 million each, with a 500,000 drone. You can sink it or make it very unsafe.
Yeah.
And so we'll never be able to go back to the situation before this war when the Strait of Hormuz was just an open waterway that we could take for granted.
So the Iranians have sort of discovered they have this very strong hand
they have,
that doesn't cost them that much money.
They always knew it in theory, but they'd never tested it before. Now they've tested it. And they must be as astonished as somebody in the White House seems to be, how quickly and effectively the straits could be closed.
We've just got a question on those strikes that I was talking about at the weekend. Can these strikes really be counted as self-defense when America was the one who actively began this war along with Israel? At this point, these are prolonged attacks, are they not? I mean, can they be counted as self-defense?
Yeah.
Question.
Well, there were a series of attacks on Bandar Abbas, which is the main port right opposite Qasem Island. It's opposite the narrow part of the Straits. And Bandar Abbas is an important city for Iran on the Straits. And then the reported explosions at Sirik and at Jask, further down the coast, which is entirely plausible. And the Americans said they were attacking rocket sites, or sites that they thought could be used maybe for anti-aircraft rockets. And then they also attacked a couple of boats they said were mine-laying in the Straits, which is entirely plausible. And those attacks could be defined as defensive in a broad sense because, for instance, one of the speculations, we don't know, but I heard a number of people speculating yesterday that maybe the Iranians on their air defense sites had turned on their radars. Now, if an air defense site turns its radar on, then any American surveillance aircraft, which are moving around in that area, would regard that as a hostile act. If on your screen it pings up and an air defense radar is targeting you, then the next thing is a missile is on its way. If that was the case, then the Americans would say, well, we have no choice, we've got to attack them. Whether or not that was true, we don't know, but there was some speculation. The point I would make is that, yes, you can justify these attacks as defensive technically, but the Americans didn't have to do it. They could have ignored it. They've ignored those sort of provocations in the past couple of months. They didn't have to do it. They chose to do it, presumably to show the Iranians that the military option was still active, that they weren't frightened to do it. They weren't frightened to take them on in specific ways. And so I think that was a message to the Iranians. Right. And the Iranians don't seem to have responded. We thought they might respond within the next 24 hours, by now, with some sort of act of their own. And it doesn't look as if they've done that. They've gone the other way and said, actually, we've got a deal. We've got here is us implementing a deal for the opening of the Straits. So I'd be very interested to see how that is received in the White House.
Yeah. And on that suggestion that, this is the Americans showing they still have cards to play here. Spodiddle, I think I've pronounced that right, says, does Trump have any cards left to play? Because it seems like the Iranians have them all. We were just talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
He has some, but they're not very high-value cards, to put it in the terms in which he always puts it. I mean, what I always say about this is that, he thinks he turned up to play a game of poker to find that the Iranians were playing Russian roulette. that the Iranians were prepared to gamble with their existence, their very existence as a junta, as a military junta. And they were prepared to gamble with their existence, which he isn't prepared to do, of course, because he's gambling with his political future. And so they were prepared to spin the chamber, put the gun to the head, click, now your turn, Mr. President. How brave are you?
Yeah.
And they figured that they could tolerate more spins of the chamber than him. And I think they're right. They can. And they figure, I think, that they can live with the physical destruction of more of Iran if Trump went back to all-out war. They could live with that longer than he can live with the political fallout of the economic damage and the political damage this is doing him in the United States. If he gets to September and he hasn't resolved this, then the outcome of the November midterms would be pretty dire. And they must figure, well, we could last till September or October if we had to, because we, the IRGC, don't work on the same basis. So I don't think he has got many cards. He's got some cards to play, and he's always got this threat that he could go back to all-out bombing. But there's no evidence that would actually change this group of IRGC leaders, who are much more hardline than the ones he had before to deal with. This group of IRGC leaders, indicate that they would live with that.
What is it they say? That Iran never wins a war, but never loses a negotiation.
Exactly. They're very good at negotiating.
Yeah.
I mean, the way they do it, the way the Russians do it, they go through every single point in excruciating detail, and just when you think it's all done, they bring in something new.
That's right.
They invent a new issue that they hadn't thought of before, which now needs to be resolved.
Yeah.
And they literally can stay awake longer than most of the others. But they just manage to keep everybody sitting there.
Time is on their side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, questions about Lebanon and Gaza, which have kind of resurfaced, haven't they, as issues. Matt, Israel plans to intensify their attacks in Lebanon, which we've seen in the last few hours. Has the US lost whatever control of them they had, and could they burn their bridges with them once they get out of the Iran conflict? So the whole issue of the US-Israel relationship.
Burn their bridges with who? Burn their bridges?
Well, could the US, because they lost control. I think.
Oh, I see.
Means,
okay, yeah. Burn the bridges. Yeah.
But between
the
US and Israel.
The US have burned their bridges.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess this goes to the heart of how much sway Trump has over Netanyahu, because or has he given him, said if you want to do more in Lebanon, get on with it.
Okay. Well, three things in answer to that question. One is that the Israelis clearly, they fear that this war will be brought to an end prematurely from their point of view, because they have got their own agenda, which is to go after Hezbollah, and they want longer to do that, and they are struggling a bit now. The IDF is in some trouble this week because of the use of drones by Hezbollah, which are really quite effective, and stopping the IDF getting on with their operation. Just like in Ukraine, it's tying them down to a distributed pattern of forces, which is not good for an offensive. If your forces have got to stay apart to avoid being targeted, you can't mount an offensive very easily. So one is that the Israelis don't want a peace deal, which closes them down before they've finished taking on Hezbollah. Two, Trump will have influence over Netanyahu. I mean, Trump is Netanyahu's most important friend. And as and when, or if and when there is a deal with Iran, then part of that deal will be he will lean on Netanyahu and say, you've got to stop. And Netanyahu will stop. And that's what the Israelis fear, that they'll be made to stop early, maybe next week, maybe the week after. So that's the second point. The third point is, so there will be a new ceasefire in Lebanon, but it won't last. So there'll be a ceasefire for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then it will break down. Just as the ceasefire in Gaza progressively breaks down, so the ceasefire in Lebanon will progressively break down, because the Israelis are now in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, its security zone, and moving further out of that zone, and Hezbollah are committed to throw them out of Lebanon and take them on. So both the Israelis and Hezbollah would observe a ceasefire for a while, and then it would break down. That's where I think we are with Lebanon.
I mean, is it possible that Israel could defeat Hezbollah, or is it going to be very difficult, do you think?
I don't think they can defeat them, but they could undermine them for a long time. They could knock them back for a long time. I mean, Hezbollah, came into existence in 1982 when the Israelis invaded Lebanon then, and they were there for 18 years, 1982 to 2000. And it was that Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon that created Hezbollah. And the Iranians established Hezbollah specifically as a resistance front. So they've been there for a long time. They're intrinsic to the society of southern Lebanon. They're intrinsic to the government of Lebanon, even though mainstream Lebanese politicians hate them. but they can't take them on. They're too weak to take on. Hezbollah are too strong. So I don't think Hezbollah could be eliminated. I mean, if you can't eliminate Hamas from Gaza, you're not going to eliminate Hezbollah from Lebanon. But the Israelis may have a realistic chance, they feel, of kicking them so hard and undermining their leadership so hard that they become a much lesser force in the future. But again, you think about all these things, Israeli policy since the atrocities of the 7th of October 2023 has been to take on, first of all, one at a time, and then all together, all of their opposition. They've taken on 5 enemies. They're now fighting 5 enemies simultaneously. Hamas, Hezbollah, the militias in Iraq, Iranian militias, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Iranians themselves. They've severely damaged all of those 5 enemies, but they haven't eliminated any of them. All of those 5 enemies are still there, albeit in a weakened state. But all of those 5 enemies are still completely devoted to the idea of destroying the state of Israel. And so you've got to ask yourself, after 3 years coming up to, or 2.5 years since the atrocities of the 7th of October, in what ways is Israel better off strategically? It's won military victories, but 5 of its enemies are still there, still devoted to your destruction. And Netanyahu sort of says, well, that's the way it is. We've got no choice but to continue to fight, and we'll fight and fight and fight for as long as it takes. And a lot of people in Israel are saying, is there no better strategy than this, Mr. Netanyahu? Is the best you can offer us a continuing war?
Forever war, yeah.
Forever, yeah. Against 5 enemies.
Yes. Now, what about Iran? Amy, it's a good question. Iran's has said they will, if the United States resume the war, Iran says it will spread attacks beyond the region if attacked again. What would this mean actually, says Amy. So what kind of things would Iran be likely to do if it, heaven forbid,
I don't know how. I mean, going beyond the region would be politically very problematical for them. Going in the region is bad enough, and I mean their attacks have been concentrated on the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, for all sorts of reasons. They really regard them as a prime enemy in the area. They've attacked American bases in Saudi Arabia, but they've not attacked other things in Saudi Arabia. They would certainly go again for all the American bases, including in Qatar, the Al Udeid and so on.
This is saying beyond the Middle East. I mean,
beyond the Middle East
would be terrorism, I assume, or some sort of.
Well, it could. Yes, I mean the idea of reactive attacks in Europe. And indeed, I mean, there are Iranian gangs or Iranian-inspired gangs in all Western countries that are engaged in sort of acts of sabotage and subversion, and a lot of the intelligence agencies have picked them up. So there may be more of that. But I mean, the idea of missile attacks. There was all this argument a while ago that had the Iranians extended their range of missiles by beyond 2,000 kilometers, so could they reach London and so on. I just think that's just so misplaced. I mean, the Iranians would want to frighten the region again, and they know that they now know they only have to keep Strait of Hormuz firmly closed to actually do immense damage to the rest of the world. And the attacks, in a way, become a bit symbolic. And what they want to show is we'll take on the Americans anywhere in the Middle East, or maybe in the Mediterranean, or maybe in Turkey, and we'll keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. And that would be pretty apocalyptic in lots of ways.
It's interesting, just going back to the beginning, and what the Iranians say is the deal, or the draft deal. Including U.S. military withdrawing from the region. Well, I mean, if the Strait of Hormuz reopens, and going forward, Iran decides that wants to close it again, I guess it could do that.
Yeah, overnight.
Particularly if part of it is that the US are no longer in the region, which is why it's probably...
Yeah, the US is not going to withdraw from the region. They may well withdraw their Navy from the blockade. I mean, that would make sense. I mean, the Navy's been there a long time, and they've got to rotate it anyway. But, I mean, the Americans have got about 38,000 troops in the region. Over 40,000 now, if you include the Marines who are with the task force. And they've got bases all over. They've got bases in just about every country in the region. They're not going to walk away from those bases because they're too useful, even though they want to reduce their footprint in the region because they know their footprint, sometimes attracts attacks. But, I mean, there's a reason why they are where they are all over the region. Every base has got a rationale, and they're not going to walk away from all of those.
Yeah, we've got a few questions also about this whole idea of... regime change, proper regime change, and the Iranian people taking back the country. At what point, says Andy Johnson, would a popular uprising within Iran be possible? Is it the case that nothing lasting would be achieved without one, and what military and political outcomes would be needed before this could happen. So it's interesting. At what point would a popular uprising be possible? It certainly doesn't look like, for the reason you said, IRGC seem
not soon.
Harsher if
not soon.
Else. So what are your thoughts on
that? I mean, we thought in early January, remember it was the first week of January and the or late December, early January, that people were out on the streets over economic privations. And we said at the time, this is a pretty serious uprising because it includes all classes of people. It's not just students, not just young people, it's not just young women who don't want their heads having to be covered, which they're always really frightened the regime. They were so frightened of young women in the past. And we said, this is all classes of people. This is different. And it was. And then the killings, was it 8th, 9th, 10th January, I seem to remember. I mean, literally up to, we know, 5,000 to 7,000, but the estimates were that might have been 30,000 people across the whole country were just shot in the streets. And the result of that, and then the bombing on February the 28th, removed Khamenei, the original Khamenei, removed several of the leaders of the IRGC. And what has happened is that what we had before the bombing was a theocracy, a clerical group, who, as it were, kept a sort of a ring between the IRGC and the government. And it was a very uneasy relationship. What's happened since the bombing is that the IRGC have basically taken over the government. So we've gone from a theocratic dictatorship to a military junta, which is what the IRGC now is. And they are completely immune, I think, to popular protest. And there's no sign, nor would there be, that the Iranian people are going to come out on the streets. Now, look, there's 90 million people in Iran. It's estimated that maybe 10%, at most 20%, support the Islamic Revolution. So in broad terms, let's say there's probably 70 or 80 million people who hate the government, who loathe it, and there's probably 10 million people who would support it. And those 10 million include the Basij, who are 500,000 lads on motorbikes who go around shooting anyone that they think is anti-regime or would do in its present circumstances. So the chances of a popular uprising are minuscule at the moment. Ultimately, of course, I mean, no government, particularly one with its economy on its knees, as Iran now is, no government can survive against the hatred of 80 or 90% of its people. But my own view is that when the revolution, when the turn comes, it won't be for a while. It might not be for a year or two, maybe longer. And when it happens, it'll be violent, very violent. We did hope at the beginning of the year it might be a sort of a relatively quick transition, that the regime would just click over and go. But when it happens, it will be very violent, and then it will pass some sort of point. But I think the irony might be, as I've said before, I think President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu might get their regime change in Iran, but probably not while they're in office. It'll be some other time, and it'll be very violent when it happens.
And there's a question along these lines from Row 59, who's saying, would the IRGC ever be overthrown? And at the moment, it's quite difficult to see how that could happen.
But when they are, I've spoken to a number of people about this who've lived through some of these things in the British system before. So when it happens quickly because all these people have got bolt holes to go to. The IRGC, they're very corrupt. I mean, they were creaming off about a third of Iran's income. Its own legal income to fund all of their various activities. That's why they're so well resourced. And all these leaders of the IRGC are rich. They've got their bolt holes abroad. They've got their children studying in universities elsewhere in the world. When it comes, there will be violence. And then there'll be a moment when it clicks. And overnight, these people will suddenly not be there. They'll all be off in their bolt holes in Russia and Kazakhstan and Geneva, maybe London, who knows. And they'll just disappear. And that's what happens. They flee because they can.
How far off do you think that could be? Impossible to say.
Not months. I mean, I'd rate it in years. I'd love to be wrong about that. I'd love to be wrong about that. But I'd say we're looking at years. But when they go, they'll all go together. They'll all go. Within 48 hours, they'll just not be there.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just finish off talking about where we are now? It's interesting because we've had Marco Rubio is probably worth listening to when he talks about, because he's been talking about the deal is not far off. It's going to take a few days, but we think we're there, and so forth. Now we have the Iranian side saying a deal is in the making, and they've got a draft deal that they're talking about publicly. So it does seem that things are moving that way rather than back to all-out war.
Yeah, there's something to be optimistic about because a lot of details of the deal we know are being discussed. So, for instance, the Iranians were in Doha earlier in the week. Galibaf was there, and Arachi was there, and Hameti, who was the governor of the central bank in Iran, he was there, and they were talking about the frozen assets. Now, there's about 100 billion's worth of Iranian frozen assets in many countries around the world, but there's 25 billion of them which are reasonably accessible, and Qatar itself holds about 6 billion apparently. But what they're saying is, look, we're owed 25 billion of unfrozen assets immediately, so we want half of it now, and then half of it after 60 days. And, of course, that's going to be quite hard for President Trump to live with. We're going to give him 12 billion just to start talking.
Because he always complained about Obama sending...
Absolutely, yeah.
Plain loads of cash.
Sell that to Marjorie Taylor Greene and so on. But anyway, that's what the Iranians are talking about. So there's details, and I think, as always, I think the Qataris are trying to be very helpful in this, and they're trying to find ways of massaging the requirements to get things going. So they're dealing that's what Marco Rubio, I think, is talking about. They're working on, quite low-level details of if there is a deal, this will happen, that will happen, and this will happen. And the sequencing of it is very, very important. So the issue is, at some point, and we've said this from day one of the war, at some point, President Trump will declare victory and leave. Right? And that's what looks as if he now really feels he's got to do. He will declare victory and leave. And then how people assess what he says is victory will be critical to the way this war is perceived.
What's the minimum he will need? What's the minimum? I mean, I assume it's something like the enrichment, a 20-year moratorium.
Something like that.
Something.
Yeah. The opening of the Strait of Hormuz, that's the first, most important. Yeah. Secondly, some sort of moratorium on on enrichment activities. And the guarantee or the promise from the Iranians that they won't develop a nuclear bomb. That's easy. They've been saying that for years. They've been promising that for years. There was a fatwa against it, which was apparently pronounced sometime in the 1980s. Nobody's quite sure when, but it was publicly acknowledged, I think, in 1992. So the Ayatollah actually had a fatwa against Iran having a nuclear weapon. Have another one. Have another fatwa. Why not? I mean, the point is they say this, and we don't believe them, and they're lying. So they could tell us the lie again, and President Trump can pretend he believes them, and we'll carry on as we were before, catching them out in the lie. So, I mean, we go back to where we were before. If the Strait of Hormuz are open, if there is some sort of moratorium on enrichment, which is what the 2015 deal gave us, we could go back to something that's plus or minus that. And then everything else will just go into the kick the can down the road. It'll become a process in which the Iranians will think that they can handle that. That plays to their strengths, process.
So what you're saying really is the minimum is he has to be able to argue that it's better than the 2015 deal, which he pulled out of.
And it'll be plus or minus. And because it'll be complex, I think there'll be something to argue. It won't look the same, but ultimately the world will have to decide. And it's very important, I think, I would really want to hear what Grossi says, the director of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, because he will have a very good technical view as to whether something is better or worse than it was in 2015. He may, for political reasons, he may not say it in public, but I'd love to know in private what he really thinks. Yeah.
But so I mean, to sum it up, I mean, the end is nigh. Do you think? I mean, we're close to.
Well, I think we're closer now than we've been for a long time to the US declaring victory and leaving. On the terms on which it leaves could take a long time to solidify. But I think the Iranians are right that Donald Trump cannot live with the political pain as long as they can live with the physical pain. And I think the political pain is now becoming quite overwhelming. Despite what he says, that pain is becoming quite overwhelming in Washington.
Yeah, and I mean, he will claim that this sort of broad deal, the sort of short memorandum, will be the victory.
Yeah, Yeah, and it's not even a peace agreement.
And then the 60 days of negotiation, he'd lose interest.
We'll move on to something else.
We'll move on to something else.
That's the point. It's not even a peace deal. It's just an MOU. Is an exchange of notes.
It's an agreement
where you agree to consider
about a possible agreement.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Talks about talks.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. For more updates and analysis on the situation in the Middle East, of course, live coverage on Sky News, on the Sky News app, and on the dedicated live blog. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next week.